The great halls of the Zarethian palace stretched wider than any building Ethan Cole had ever seen. Pillars carved from a crystal-like stone reached high into the ceiling, glowing faintly with natural light refracted from outside. The place was filled with colors and sounds that made his senses almost overload. Musicians played instruments that seemed to bend air itself into music, while hundreds of alien nobles in elegant robes moved across the floor with measured grace. This was not just a gathering. It was a demonstration of wealth, tradition, and power. Ethan was not supposed to be here. At least not in this role. He was part of the human delegation, yes, but not a diplomat or senior officer. He was a junior officer, a pilot who had joined the mission as part of the security detail. Somehow, though, he had ended up being chosen to stand near the center of the room during the banquet, close enough to the Zarathian royal family that he could see every flicker of expression on their unusual but strangely elegant faces. The Zarathians were tall and graceful, their movements precise, their eyes a shade of silver that reflected torchlight like polished mirrors. Their skin ranged in hues of pale blue to light bronze, smooth and flawless. They looked like figures carved from living marble. Among them sat their princess Cernea, a figure of quiet poise. She was dressed in flowing robes of deep violet, trimmed with threads of silver. A thin crown of crystal rested against her forehead, catching the hall's light and scattering it into shards of color. She sat upright, her posture formal, her gaze steady, yet Ethan noticed a flicker of curiosity whenever her eyes drifted toward the human guests. The banquet was supposed to be a moment of celebration. Humanity had been invited to discuss trade, culture, and perhaps even a long-term alliance. The Zarethian Empire was powerful, and their invitation had been considered a rare honor. Humanity was still a young race among the stars, considered inexperienced compared to civilizations that had charted galaxies for millennia. This evening, the goal was simple: prove that humans were worth respect. The problem was that humans and Zarathians could not have been more different in how they handled formality. To Ethan, everything about the night felt stiff, heavy, and suffocating. Nobles raised crystal cups but never drank until the right moment. They spoke in long, ceremonial sentences that repeated old phrases like chants. Even the laughter sounded restrained, as if measured carefully before being released. The human diplomats were doing their best to blend in, but Ethan could see the tension in their shoulders. When his turn came to greet the princess, Ethan felt every eye in the room fix on him. His superior had whispered a dozen reminders earlier. Bow respectfully, say only the prepared words, never improvise. Ethan took a breath, stepped forward, and bowed in the human way, placing one hand over his chest. Princess Cernea, he said, trying to keep his voice calm. On behalf of my people, I offer gratitude for your hospitality. Cernea tilted her head slightly. Her silver eyes glinted like a mirror catching sunlight. She spoke with a voice that was calm but resonant. Carrying across the hall, human Ethan Cole, she said, pronouncing his name carefully as though tasting each syllable. You are welcome in the halls of Zarathia. May your presence bring balance to the celebration. There was a pause. Ethan should have stepped back then. That was the script. But his nerves, combined with the stiffness of the evening, made him hesitate. He caught sight of the serious faces of the nobles, the way no one dared to smile freely, and he felt something rise in him. Humor had always been his shield, his way of breaking tension. Against his better judgment, the words left his mouth before he could stop them. You'd make a fine wife, he said lightly, almost as a joke to himself. The sound carried farther than he expected. The hall went silent in an instant. The music faltered. Cups froze midair. The human diplomats turned pale, eyes wide in horror. Ethan's stomach dropped. He realized too late what he had just done. Princess Cernea's gaze locked on him. There was no anger in her expression, only a stillness that felt heavier than silence. For a long moment, no one moved. Then she spoke. I accept. The words were simple. The impact was not. Gasps erupted across the hall. Nobles leaned toward one another, whispering in sharp tones. The human delegation looked ready to collapse. Ethan felt the ground sway beneath him. Except what? It had been a joke. A nervous, foolish attempt at humor. But from the looks around him, it was clear the Zarathians did not take it as such. The king himself, seated at the high table beside Cernea, narrowed his silver eyes. His face was unreadable, but his silence made the hall even heavier. Ethan swallowed hard. His first instinct was to laugh and shake his head, to explain it was not serious. But the way the nobles stared at him told him this was no small misunderstanding. He had triggered something far deeper than he understood. The banquet resumed with forced calm, but Ethan could feel the weight of eyes on him wherever he moved. His fellow humans avoided his gaze, their expressions a mixture of shock and dread. The rest of the night passed in a blur. Dishes were brought out, songs were played, but Ethan barely tasted or heard any of it. All he could think of was the princess's voice, calm and certain. "I accept." Later, when the banquet ended, Ethan was escorted with the rest of the delegation to their chambers. His superior pulled him aside, voice low but sharp. "Do you have any idea what you just did?" "I was joking," Ethan said, his words stumbling out. "I didn't mean—" "You proposed marriage. In their court. In front of their royal family. And the princess accepted." Ethan froze. His superior's face told him this was no exaggeration. In Zarathian culture, words spoken in the royal hall carried binding power. What had been meant as light humor had been taken as a formal declaration. That night, Ethan lay awake in his quarters, staring at the alien patterns carved into the ceiling. He replayed the moment over and over in his mind, searching for some detail that could undo it. But the truth settled in his chest like a stone. He, a human pilot from Earth, had just stumbled into a royal engagement with an alien princess. And by the looks of it, there was no easy way out. The morning after the banquet was no easier than the evening itself. Ethan woke to the soft chime of Zarathian attendants outside his chamber. The quarters were more luxurious than anything he had known on Earth. The walls shimmered with pale blue light as if sunlight had been woven into stone. The bed was wide, soft, and layered with blankets that felt like woven silk. Yet despite the comfort, Ethan had barely slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he heard the princess's calm voice again. "I accept." He rubbed his face and forced himself upright. His thoughts were tangled. Maybe it had all been some misunderstanding. Maybe the translation system had turned his words into something more serious than intended. He clung to that hope until the door slid open and his superior, Ambassador Reynolds, entered with a look of heavy worry. "We need to talk," Reynolds said, closing the door firmly. Ethan nodded. His throat felt dry. "The royal court has issued a statement," Reynolds continued. "They have formally recognized your words as a binding proposal. And the princess has not withdrawn her acceptance." Ethan stared. His heart dropped. "So this is official?" "As official as anything in their culture can be," Reynolds said. "Do you understand the situation we are in? If you try to deny it, they may see it as an insult to the princess and the throne. That could destroy every hope of alliance. If you accept it, you will become more than just a pilot. You will become a symbol. The first human to join with Zarathian royalty." Ethan rubbed his temples. He had wanted to be useful on this mission, but not like this. "I never meant it seriously," he muttered. "I know," Reynolds said, his voice softening slightly. "But intentions do not matter here. Traditions matter. Words matter. You need to be careful now. The princess has requested to see you this afternoon. Go listen, be respectful. We will try to guide this carefully. For now, do nothing foolish." The ambassador left Ethan with a weight that pressed on his chest. He paced the chamber, then sat, then stood again. Nothing about this made sense. He had made one careless joke, and now the fate of relations between two civilizations rested on him. When the attendants finally arrived to guide him to the princess, he followed without protest. They led him through long hallways where every wall shimmered like polished stone. The air smelled faintly of spice and flowers. They reached a large garden enclosed under a transparent dome. Sunlight poured through, feeding trees with wide golden leaves and flowers that glowed softly with their own inner colors. In the center stood Princess Cernea. She turned as Ethan approached. Her silver eyes fixed on him, calm but watchful. She motioned for the attendants to leave, and soon they were alone in the garden. "You're restless," she said, tilting her head slightly. "Your people worry. You worry. Is that correct?" Ethan nodded. "That's one way to put it. Princess, about last night. I think you misunderstood. Among humans, what I said was meant as humor, a way to ease the tension. I didn't mean it as a real proposal." Cernea studied him in silence for a long moment. The sound of wind brushing the leaves filled the pause. Finally, she spoke. "In Zarathian court, words are not shadows. They are stone. Spoken before the royal family, they carry weight. To say such a thing is to bind yourself. Ethan sighed. So you're telling me that no matter what, I'm stuck in this? Her lips curved into the faintest smile, though it was more curious than amused. Stuck. That is a human word of resistance. Do you regret what you said? Yes, Ethan admitted, because I didn't mean it. It was careless. Instead of anger, Cernea's eyes softened. I do not take insult. Your words were strange, yet they carried a tone I have rarely heard in the court. Lightness, playfulness. Our nobles speak in chains. Every phrase is heavy with tradition. When you spoke, the air changed. It startled me. It interested me. Ethan blinked. You liked it? I accepted it, Cernea said, because I wished to see what kind of bond could form between our peoples. A union of tradition and something new. Ethan struggled to find the right response. He had expected anger or scorn. Instead, the princess seemed genuinely curious about him. Where I come from, he said slowly. Marriage is not decided by tradition or formality alone. It is a choice. Two people decide together not just because of duty, because they want to. Sometimes we even joke about it. That's what I was doing. A joke. Cernea walked closer, her robe brushing the grass softly. Choice, she repeated. That word has meaning. Here, choice is a luxury of few. For most paths are set before they take their first breath. I am royal. My path was written even before mine. Her honesty surprised him. For the first time, Ethan saw not just the regal figure presented to the court, but a person behind it. Someone who carried weight not by choice, but by expectation. You don't want this either, Ethan guessed. Cernea tilted her head again. I do not fear it. But I wonder. If your people value choice, then perhaps your presence is not a mistake, but a chance. You may teach us something, and perhaps I may learn. Ethan exhaled slowly. He could see now that there was no simple escape. Denying her publicly could cause offense. Accepting blindly felt impossible. But maybe there was another way. If he treated this not as a binding chain, but as an opportunity to learn about her culture, maybe he could survive this without sparking disaster. All right, he said carefully. Then let's talk. Learn from each other. If we're supposed to be part of some bond, then maybe we should start with understanding. Cernea's faint smile returned, this time warmer. That is acceptable. They began to walk through the garden together. She showed him the trees, each one planted to honor a moment of Zarathian history. She explained the meaning of flowers, how each color represented a different bond of loyalty or affection. Ethan listened, fascinated despite his nerves. The Zarathian culture was rigid, yes, but also layered with meaning. Everything symbolized something greater. In return, he told her about Earth. He spoke of cities alive with laughter, of markets filled with noise and music, of festivals where people danced without script or command. He described the oceans that stretched beyond sight, the mountains that pierced the clouds, the simple joy of sitting under the stars with friends. Cernea listened with an intensity that surprised him. Her silver eyes did not waver. When he spoke of laughter, she asked him to explain. When he described dancing without order, she raised her brow as if struggling to imagine it. Your people live in waves, she said finally, rising, falling, free. Ours live in lines, straight, unbroken, set before us. To combine wave and line, that could change much. For the first time since the banquet, Ethan felt a flicker of ease. Maybe this did not have to end in disaster. Maybe, just maybe, something good could come of it. As the sun lowered beyond the dome, casting long golden light across the garden, Cernea turned to him once more. Tomorrow you will be summoned before the council. They will test your worth. Do not fear. You're not alone in this now. Ethan's chest tightened. He had no idea what kind of test she meant, but he nodded. I'll try. You will not try, Cernea said softly, her silver gaze steady. You will show them what it means to be human. The following morning arrived with a quiet tension that pressed against every corridor of the Zarathian palace. Ethan Cole had hardly slept again. His mind replayed Princess Cernea's words in the garden. Tomorrow you will be summoned before the council. They will test your worth. He had no clear idea what that meant, only that it sounded far more serious than anything he was prepared for. When attendants arrived, their expressions gave nothing away. They dressed him in ceremonial robes woven with white and silver threads, colors meant to symbolize sincerity and clarity. Ethan looked at himself in the polished surface of the chamber wall and almost laughed. He felt like a child wearing clothes several sizes too grand. The attendants guided him into the council chamber. The room was vast, circular, and lined with tall crystal windows that let sunlight pour across the polished floor. 12 Zarathian council members sat in elevated seats carved from stone that shimmered faintly with power. At the far end, Princess Cernea sat beside her father, King Arthon, both observing in silence. The ambassador and the other human delegates had been allowed to stand near the wall, but Ethan was alone at the center of the chamber. He felt their eyes on him, tense and worried. A counselor rose. His robes were dark green, trimmed with golden thread. His silver eyes glinted with judgment as he spoke. "Human Ethan Cole, you have spoken words in the royal hall that bind you to our princess. But words are not enough. In Zarathian custom, a union must be tested. You will face the trial of bonding. If you succeed, your bond may stand. If you fail, your words will be judged empty and your people may carry the shame." Ethan swallowed hard. The weight of the moment pressed down like stone. He nodded. "What do I have to do?" The counselor raised a hand. 3 attendants entered, carrying strange objects. One held a puzzle of interlocking crystal pieces. Another carried a staff that glowed faintly with energy. The third brought a vessel filled with sand that moved as if alive, flowing in strange patterns. The trial of bonding, the counselor declared, tests 3 things: mind, body, and spirit. You will be challenged in each. "You may proceed," Ethan's heart pounded. He had never trained for this. He was a pilot, not a diplomat, not a warrior, not a philosopher. But he had no choice now. The first trial was placed before him, the puzzle of crystal pieces. It looked like a sphere broken into dozens of jagged shards, each one glowing faintly. The goal was clear: reassemble the sphere. The attendants bowed and stepped back. Ethan knelt by the puzzle. He could hear the whispers of the counselors, sharp and doubtful. He picked up a shard and examined it. The edges shimmered, shifting when touched, making it hard to match with others. "Mind over haste," one counselor murmured. "He will not last," Ethan frowned. He was never good at puzzles, but he remembered something from his childhood. His mother had once told him that sometimes puzzles were not about force but about pattern. He took a breath, ignored the whispers, and started trying combinations. At first, nothing worked. The shards rejected each other, slipping apart. But instead of forcing them, Ethan slowed down. He tilted them under the light. The glow shifted, and he noticed that certain edges reflected similar colors. He smiled faintly. "So you want me to match the colors, not the shapes," he muttered. Piece by piece, he began to fit them together, not by guessing blindly, but by watching how the light flowed across their surfaces. The puzzle started to form. Within minutes, the shards fused into a perfect sphere, glowing with steady light. Ethan placed it on the stand. Gasps echoed in the chamber. Some counselors leaned forward in surprise. Princess Cernea's lips curved into the faintest smile. The second trial was brought forward. The glowing staff was placed in Ethan's hands. It was heavier than it looked, humming with power. Across the chamber, a tall Zarathian guard stepped forward, armed with a similar staff. "This is the trial of body," a counselor explained. "Prove your strength and skill." Ethan's stomach twisted. A duel. He was no fighter, at least not in the way they expected. The guard bowed formally, then raised the staff in a practice stance. Ethan raised his clumsily, already feeling outmatched. The duel began. The guard moved swiftly, striking with precision. Ethan barely blocked, the staff vibrating in his hands. He stumbled back, heart racing. The counselors whispered again, some shaking their heads, but Ethan noticed something. The guard's strikes were predictable, almost too perfect. Each movement followed a pattern. That was how Zarathians fought. Controlled, precise, disciplined. Ethan realized he could not win by matching that style. He had to do the opposite. Instead of standing firm, he began moving unpredictably. He ducked when not expected, sidestepped awkwardly, even stumbled on purpose. His clumsy movements threw off the guard's rhythm. When the guard swung, expecting a proper block, Ethan dropped low and the staff whooshed over his head. He scrambled back up and tapped the guard's shoulder with the glowing staff. The chamber went silent. Ethan blinked. Did that count? The counselor who had introduced the trial stood frowning deeply. But the rules were the rules. The staff had touched the opponent. Ethan had succeeded. Whispers filled the chamber again. Some were shocked, others amused. A few even seemed impressed. The final trial was brought forth. The vessel of living sand was placed before him. The sand shifted on its own, forming shapes that broke apart again. "This is the trial of spirit," another counselor said. "You must show harmony with the essence of Zarathia. Place your hand in the vessel. If the sand accepts you, the bond may be honored. If it rejects you, the trial is ended." Ethan hesitated. He looked toward Cernea. Her silver eyes were steady, her expression unreadable. He took a breath and placed his hand into the sand. The grains moved instantly, wrapping around his fingers, swirling up his arm. They glowed with faint light, shifting between shapes. Ethan felt warmth travel through his skin, not painful but strange. Images flickered in his mind. He saw glimpses of Zarathian history, wars, victories, sorrow, pride. The sand was testing him, searching for something inside. He closed his eyes and let the images come. When he felt the weight of their pride and their rigid traditions, he thought of Earth. He thought of laughter, of mistakes, of freedom, of people choosing their own path. He thought of his careless joke that had led him here, and how it carried truth as well as folly. The sand pulsed warmly. Then it settled, glowing softly around his hand before sinking back into the vessel. Silence filled the chamber. "The sand accepts him," the counselor said, his voice heavy with disbelief. Ethan pulled his hand free, breathing hard. He looked toward Cernea. For the first time, her smile was clear, not faint, not hidden. The king rose slowly. His presence filled the chamber with authority. "The human has passed the trial of bonding. The words spoken in our hall are honored. The bond stands." The chamber erupted in murmurs. Some voices carried outrage, others reluctant respect. Ethan felt weak with relief. He had survived, though he could hardly believe it himself. As the council dismissed, Cernea approached him. She stood close enough that only he could hear her words. "You did not fight as they expected," she said softly. "You solved, you endured, you adapted. That is what makes you human. That is what I hoped to see." Ethan exhaled, managing a small smile. "Guess I just have a talent for not doing things the right way." Cernea's silver eyes sparkled faintly. "Sometimes the wrong way is the path that changes everything." The trial of bonding had ended in Ethan's favor, but peace did not follow. Instead, whispers spread through the Zarathian palace like a storm across open water. Some nobles spoke of surprise and curiosity. Others muttered of disgrace. The idea that a human, a young pilot with no noble blood, could pass the sacred trials unsettled traditions older than entire human civilizations. Ethan felt the weight of those stares wherever he walked. Servants bowed politely, yet their eyes carried questions. Guards stood at their posts, but their rigid stances seemed sharper when he passed. Even the air in the great halls seemed heavy. He had proven himself in the trial, yet in the eyes of many he was still an intruder. One evening, as he walked through a long corridor decorated with crystal lanterns, Ambassador Reynolds caught up to him. The ambassador's face was lined with fatigue. "You've made history," Reynolds said in a low voice. "But history is rarely comfortable. There are factions here that will never accept this bond, no matter how many trials you pass." Ethan sighed. "I noticed. Feels like I'm carrying a target on my back." Reynolds glanced around before lowering his tone further. "Keep close to the princess. She is your strongest ally now. Without her, you'll be crushed under politics faster than you can blink." That advice proved true the very next day. Ethan was summoned before the council again, but this time the air in the chamber felt colder. The counselors sat taller, their silver eyes harder. A counselor draped in deep crimson robes stood. His name was Lord Valen, one of the most influential nobles in the empire. His voice was sharp as crystal. "This human has deceived us," Valen declared. "The trial may have accepted him, but his heart does not belong to our people. I have here a report that proves he mocked our customs in secret, speaking with disdain of our sacred traditions." Gasps echoed across the chamber. Ethan froze, stunned. He had never said such things. "That's a lie," Ethan said firmly. Valen's eyes narrowed. "Is it? Witnesses claim they heard you belittle the trial of bonding, saying it was a game for children." The chamber filled with murmurs. Ethan's hands clenched. He realized with sinking dread what was happening. This was no misunderstanding. This was sabotage. Princess Cernea rose gracefully from her seat beside her father. Her voice was calm, but her words cut through the noise. "I was with him," she said. "He did not mock our traditions. He respected them. He faced them with honesty. These accusations are false. Valan's lips curled in disdain. Your Highness, your heart clouds your judgment. This human is clever, yes, but cleverness can deceive. He will bring shame upon our empire if we allow this bond to continue. Cernea's silver gaze did not waver. And what will bring greater shame, Lord Valan? To honor a man who faced our trials with courage, or to betray our own laws by discarding him because he is not born of our world. The chamber stirred. Some nobles whispered in agreement, others in disapproval. Ethan stood silently, his pulse racing. He had never felt more out of place, yet never more grateful. Without Cernea's defense, he would have been cast out that very moment. The king raised his hand, silencing the chamber. His voice was steady but heavy with warning. Enough. The matter will be investigated. Until truth is found, the bond stands. But let it be known, any false step and the human will answer for it. The session ended, but tension lingered. As the chamber emptied, Ethan approached Cernea. You saved me, he said quietly. Cernea met his gaze, her voice soft yet steady. I did what was just. But know this, Ethan Cole, they will not stop. They fear change, and you are change itself. You must be ready. That night, Ethan's quarters felt less like safety and more like a cage. He paced the floor, replaying the accusations. Whoever had spread those lies wanted him gone. Not just rejected, but disgraced. He clenched his fists, frustration building. Back home, if someone spread lies, he could defend himself directly. Here, one wrong move could offend an empire. The following days only deepened the unease. In the dining halls, nobles avoided him or whispered behind their hands. During a ceremony in the palace gardens, Ethan found his cup had been deliberately spilled, staining his ceremonial robes before the entire gathering. Laughter rippled quietly from the noble circles. He bore it with gritted teeth. Cernea, however, noticed everything. One evening, she came to him in the gardens where the golden-leaved trees swayed under the light of twin moons. You feel cornered, she said softly. Ethan gave a humorless laugh. I feel like every step I take is the wrong one. They don't want me here, no matter what I do. Cernea stepped closer, her gaze steady. That is because you are not like them. They fear what they cannot control. But you must not let their fear become your own. Show them what it means to be human. And what does that mean? Ethan asked, his voice tight. She studied him for a moment, then answered. It means to choose. To speak even when silence is safer. To laugh even when shadows press close. It means to live as if life belongs to you, not to the chains of others. Her words steadied him more than he expected. He realized that she too carried chains of expectation. Perhaps that was why she defended him so fiercely. A few days later, their enemies struck again. During a council gathering, Lord Valan presented what he claimed was proof, a recording crystal. When activated, it projected an image of Ethan's voice mocking the trials in crude words. Gasps filled the chamber once more. Valan's voice rang with triumph. Here is the truth. The human does not respect us. He must be cast out. Ethan's blood ran cold. The voice was his, or at least sounded like his, but he had never said those things. It was a fabrication. Before he could speak, Cernea rose. Her voice cut clear across the chamber. This crystal is false, Valan laughed. You claim falsehood without proof? Cernea's silver eyes glinted. Proof lies in the very flaw of your scheme. The human does not speak in chains as we do. His words flow with lightness, with humor. This recording carries none of that. It is stiff-forced, made to mimic what cannot be mimicked. Anyone who has spoken with him knows this, the chamber murmured. Several counselors exchanged uncertain looks. Ethan felt a rush of gratitude and admiration. She had defended him not with power, but with understanding. She knew him well enough to see the lie for what it was. The king raised his hand again. Until this recording is verified, judgment is withheld. But know this, Lord Valan. If falsehood is proven, it will be your shame, not his. Valan's expression hardened, but he bowed stiffly. As the council dispersed, Ethan turned to Cernea. How did you know? Cernea's lips curved into the faintest smile. Because I listen. And I see. They will weave lies, but lies cannot hide the truth of who you are. For the first time, Ethan felt something deeper than gratitude. He felt partnership. They were no longer just bound by accident or tradition. They were standing together against forces that wanted them broken apart. That night, as he looked out from his chamber window at the shining towers of the Zarathian capital, Ethan realized something important. This was no longer about surviving a mistake. This was about proving that humanity had a place among the stars, not by pretending to be like others, but by showing the strength of being different. And with Cernia beside him, he felt that maybe, just maybe, they could succeed. The palace was quieter than usual that morning, but the tension was heavier than ever. Word had spread through the Zarathian Empire about the conspiracy led by Lord Valen. The council was preparing to hold a final hearing to reveal the truth behind the fabricated recording, and to determine once and for all whether the human, Ethan Cole, would remain bound to Princess Cernia. Ethan sat in his chamber, staring at his reflection in the crystal-like walls. His ceremonial robes were again laid out for the council, white and silver trimmed with threads of gold that symbolized sincerity, honor, and unity. He took a deep breath. This moment would define not only his personal fate but the place of humanity in the Empire. A soft chime signaled that Cernia had arrived. She entered with her usual grace, her silver eyes calm yet determined. "You are ready," she said, her voice soft but firm. "I hope so," Ethan admitted. "I've faced trials, lies, and threats, but I still feel unprepared." Cernia stepped closer, her hand brushing lightly against his arm. "You are not alone. Today, they will see who you are and not who they wish to see. Remember what I told you. Truth is stronger than fear." Together they walked through the palace corridors, their footsteps echoing softly against the polished floor. Outside, the palace was alive with movement. Guards were stationed along every path, and nobles whispered in small clusters, some with curiosity, others with evident disapproval. Despite the unease, Ethan felt a new confidence growing inside him. He had survived every challenge so far by being himself, honest, adaptable, and unafraid to face the unknown. The council chamber was filled to capacity. Every counselor, noble, and official in the Empire seemed to be present. Princess Cernia took her place beside her father at the high dais, while Ethan was led to stand at the center, directly in view of all present. Lord Valen stood at the opposite side, his robes a deep crimson, his expression cold and unyielding. The king raised his hand. Silence swept the chamber. "This assembly convenes to resolve the accusations against human Ethan Cole and to determine the validity of his bond with Princess Cernia." The king began. His voice echoed across the room, carrying authority and calm. "Lord Valen, present your evidence." Valen stepped forward, holding the crystal that supposedly contained Ethan's mocking words. He activated it, projecting the voice that mimicked Ethan's tone, harsh and disrespectful. The chamber filled with murmurs, some nobles nodding as if convinced, others frowning in doubt. Ethan's heart pounded. He took a slow, steadying breath. Then, to the surprise of many, he stepped forward. "This is not my voice," he said clearly, his tone calm but firm. "It is a fabrication. Listen carefully to my words, my tone, the flow of speech. This recording imitates me, but it cannot capture the life, the pauses, or the choices I make when I speak honestly. I have always respected Zarathian customs. I have faced every trial in truth. Everything in this chamber, my actions, my words, my intentions, is open for verification." The chamber fell silent. Even Lord Valen's expression faltered slightly. Cernia rose from her seat, her silver eyes fixed on the counselors. "The human speaks truth," she said. "I have witnessed it with my own eyes. Every trial he faced, every challenge he endured, he faced with courage, honor, and integrity. He has proven himself worthy of trust. To deny him now would be to deny the values we claim to uphold as a civilization." The counselors whispered among themselves. Some nodded slowly. Others exchanged uneasy glances. The king raised his hand again, silencing the chatter. "Evidence must be examined fully," he said. "This assembly will hear witnesses who can attest to the truth." Several attendants stepped forward, each recounting moments where they had observed Ethan during the trials, noting his honesty, his respect, and the clever ways he had overcome obstacles. Even some of the junior nobles who had doubted him were forced to admit that his actions were genuine. The recording was inspected and analyzed carefully. It revealed subtle inconsistencies in tone and timing, confirming it was a forgery. Lord Valen's lips pressed into a thin line, but he could no longer deny the proof. The chamber turned its attention back to the king. "Human Ethan Cole," the king said finally, "you have faced trials, endured false accusations, and shown the qualities of courage, wisdom, and honor. Your bond with Princess Cernia is recognized and validated by this council. Relief washed over Ethan, though he forced himself to remain composed. He looked at Cernea, who gave him a small, reassuring nod. The final obstacle was not political but personal. Princess Cernea stood and faced the chamber. "People of Zarathia," she said, her voice carrying with calm authority, "we have traditions that guide us. But traditions are not walls that keep truth from entering. Ethan Cole has proven that humanity is worthy not because we force them to imitate us, but because their qualities, their honesty, their courage, their humor, and their willingness to learn show a strength we can admire. Let this bond stand as an example that strength is not always in lineage or power, but in the character of those who live with integrity." A hush fell over the chamber. For a moment, no one breathed. Then one by one, nobles began to nod in respect. Some bowed slightly, others whispered agreements to neighbors. Even Lord Valen's expression softened, though pride still held his posture rigid. Ethan felt an unfamiliar warmth in his chest. The weight of expectation, the fear of failure, the tension of being an outsider, it all lifted. For the first time, he could smile without caution. He had survived every test not by pretending to be like the Zarathians, but by being himself. Humanity's qualities, imperfect, unpredictable, and full of heart, had won respect in a civilization far older and wiser than Earth. The council formally declared the bond recognized. Ethan and Cernea stood together side by side in the presence of the king and the nobles. The chamber erupted in applause, not loud or wild, but dignified and sincere. The applause carried the acknowledgement of both tradition and the acceptance of something new, bridging two civilizations with understanding and respect. After the ceremony, Ethan and Cernea walked through the palace gardens, the twin moons casting silver light across golden leaves. "You made it," Ethan said, a mix of exhaustion and relief in his voice. "No," Cernea replied softly, "we made it. Together. You showed us that strength is more than control, that courage is more than power, and that honor can exist even in someone unlike us." Ethan looked at her, his heart full. "I never expected to be part of something like this. Honestly, I just wanted to survive the banquet without embarrassing myself." Cernea laughed lightly, a musical sound that made Ethan grin. "And yet you have done far more than survive. You have changed hearts, opened minds, and reminded us that sometimes being human is the greatest strength of all." Days turned into weeks, and life at the palace slowly shifted. Nobles who had once doubted him now sought his insight, curious about the human ways he spoke of. Ethan taught Zarathians about Earth's cultures, its festivals, its humor, its creativity. In return, he learned more of their traditions, their history, and the depth of their society. The bond between Ethan and Cernea deepened. They were no longer a symbol of accident or joke. They were partners, equals, and representatives of a new understanding between two worlds. Their laughter could be heard through the palace halls, their discussions a blend of tradition and novelty. Where once the Empire had feared the unknown, it now began to embrace the possibilities that humanity brought. Ethan realized that the true victory was not simply surviving the trials or disproving lies. The victory was showing that being different did not mean being weak, that humor, honesty, and adaptability could create bridges even between the stars. On a quiet evening, Ethan stood with Cernea at the highest balcony of the palace, looking out over the shining towers of the capital. The twin moons reflected off the crystalline walls, casting a soft glow across the city. "You know," Ethan said, "if I had known this was going to happen, I would never have joked at the banquet." Cernea smiled, her silver eyes twinkling. "And yet that joke led us here. Perhaps it was not careless, but destiny hidden in humor." Ethan laughed, a warm, genuine sound. "Then I guess I'd make a fine human after all." "And I," she said, "would make a fine partner to a human." As they stood together, two worlds seemed to come closer. The Zarathian Empire began to change, not overnight but gradually, influenced by the courage and character of a single human who had dared to speak a joke and live honestly. And in that light, humanity's place among the stars felt brighter, stronger, and full of promise. The journey had begun with one careless word. Now it had become a bond that could shape history, and for Ethan Cole, what had started as a joke had become the greatest adventure of all.